This first question, I feel like I have a sophisticated version of it, but I want to ask like the basic version of it, which is like, do y'all believe in ghosts? And is like, or is like your interaction with ghosts more metaphorical, or is it like supernatural? Like, I feel like we have dived a lot into ghosts tonight, and I'm just curious.
Do you mean in like the Patrick Swayze sense, or what are we talking here? What's the?
I mean, what are ghosts to you?
It's very funny because once at before a reading, like a few years ago, there was a whole conversation about ghosts and between writers, and some were very strongly against ghosts. Some were big believers in ghosts, but it was a very memorable exchange. So
they were anti-ghost.
What?
Anti-ghost? They didn't
want... yeah, there was somebody who like banged on the table even about the ghosts. Yeah, Adam Tedesco was there, who's here right now. So yeah.
Anti-ghost, Adam? Are you?
Adam, how do you feel about ghosts?
I'm pro-ghost. I welcome them. I think I'm agnostic until they show up.
There you go.
Yeah.
Shira, where did you fall in the conversation?
Oh, I just listened to it really because it was very dramatic, very dramatic. But and I was just among the hosts, so I didn't want to interfere. But yes, it was uncanny. Speaking of ghosts, that both of us had ghosts in our poems today, and a ghost could be just like a ghost of something, could also just be something that's left behind. It can be something faint. Doesn't necessarily have to be supernatural, right? So something that is liminal. So there, but not there. So hovering. So so I think that so in my usage of it, I think in what I read, it was the sense of invisibility that occurs to that a lot of older women have expressed to me about feeling, and this whole territory of an aging woman, because it is ghost-like right now, I think still, because feminism is now entering that generation, that age group, and so identity, more definition of identity is developing, and more models of expectations of vibrancy, etc., are happening right now. So that's one way that I'm using them. So I think, Adam, you're using them differently.
A little bit. I mean, I think ghosts are probably the best metaphor we have for what was and what could be. I think ghosts often speak to this notion of some kind of ambition, either thwarted or recognized. I've never seen a ghost personally. I've had some interesting ghost adjacent encounters, but I think what I've always loved most is the romantic notion of ghosts. And that's not to take it back to the Patrick Swayze idea, but more just the sense of this feeling that there's unfinished business, that there's still that there's still some living to be done, the idea that the world has carried on, but you're still part of it in some sense. You know, one of the things I explored in the book was a lot of it dealt with the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession. And so this idea of what it means to be othered in some ways, forcibly, right? I think the thing I've always loved about supernatural literature, or, I'm thinking like strictly supernatural or classically supernatural maybe, is this idea that, you know, almost like Hamlet's father, like times have moved on, but they're still there. They're trying to talk to these people. They've been left behind and they don't even realize that they're ghosts in that sense. I think that we're often, I think that's a very common experience, particularly now that we're digital in that way, to an even greater extent, what makes for agency in this world. I find ghostly being the best metaphor that I can think of, or the best description I can come up with for so many times, particularly this one.
Thank you. That was fun, both of you. We got this excellent question in the chat for Shira, and then I have a follow-up for Adam that's kind of adjacent to it. But this question in the chat is, how do you handle the graphic elements in your concrete poems when you're presenting at readings? I saw your physical bodily gestures in this reading.
Oh, okay. So I do find ways to bring it. I will do things like if I'm face to face, and I can move my body a certain ways. So I will use my body to sort of like write what the visual moves on the page. I also sometimes ask people in the audience to configure a certain way. And so, for instance, I have a poem where the text is, there's double text, they're parallel. And so I'll ask two people to stand back to back and ask them to read those lines. I also, so I can do parentheses and I can do periods and I can do commas and stuff like that. I also, like in this book, I have a Xerox of a hand. And so I'll do, when I'm on Zoom, sometimes I'll do that. I'll also use, I'll use cutout letters. Because I also do things with letter forms. I will say that it does take more energy to perform the visual poems. And so when I'm not feeling so energetic, I have to say no to choosing those visual poems to read. But I actually find it enjoyable to try to find ways to translate the visual on the page to perform it, and in the performance to try to recreate in some way the feeling, the experience that I'm trying to that I would like readers to get when they're reading it on the page. So it's a kind of translation.
Awesome, Shira. Adam, I have an adjacent question for you. So you set up this hotline where people can kind of call in and then like experience these poems through a phone. It was really fun to play with it and just like press buttons and kind of see where I ended up. Can you tell me about what that process was like and how you set it up and how that came to be?
Yeah, so I mean, it ties into the kind of analog telephone technology concerns of the book, with the bell system. And so I came up with the idea last summer that, Saraband is such an amazing press, and they're willing to go out on all kinds of limbs to do weird and crazy stuff. And so I suggested it to them last summer, and they said, sure, now you need to figure it out. I was hoping they would do it. So I had to teach myself telephony, which I guess is the science of telephone banking and making up a phone tree. And thankfully you can do it on the internet now, so it's much easier. But, in a pre-internet era, one of the things that I always loved, and when you still had payphones around, was you would just try random numbers on the phone, random 1-800 numbers, and seeing what you might end up with. And I love this idea of, depending on what button you pressed, you would get sucked into some other room. And it was just a really interesting experience. And so I wanted to, I knew I wanted to do something a little bit more analog in terms of, getting the book out there. And, weirdly, it became pretty popular just based on it hit right as the pandemic started, which is a kind of synchronicity that I would never hope for in that sense. But I think, you know, being on Zoom all the time, there's something really kind of pleasing and intimate. And I'm sure you guys have experienced this too. There's something so deliciously intimate about having a phone call with someone now and not having to look at them. It's almost a pleasure not having to look at people. And that's not to say that you aren't nice to look at. It's just that there's so much visual culture in our faces right now that, you know, I know for myself, I've been teaching remotely since March, and I just have facial dysmorphia now. I mean, like there's no notion of what normal it looks like anymore in that sense. And so, yeah, I wanted to have some fun with, I wanted the hotline to be like an extension of the book too, so a companion to it. So, you know, I tell some ghost stories on there. There's some things on there that are exclusive only to the hotline itself. You know, it's a fun, it was a fun exercise in broadening, I guess, the scope of the world of the book and opening it up to listeners as well as readers.
Thank you, Adam. And if you haven't played around with that phone, like feature yet, you should be able to find it if you go to our Facebook page. I have another question for both of you that kind of has to do with myth. So Shira, how did you land on the figure of the Sisyphusina? What kind of imaginative leaps took you there?
I don't really remember how I got onto it, except that I'm very into equal opportunity. And there was no, you know, Sisyphus says that there needs to be equal opportunity in existentialism as well, right? So I don't really remember how I got to that, but I did. And then once I did, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And so I wanted to keep on going with it. But I just also, like, it made me think what Adam was saying, what you were saying about the phone and the listening. So similarly, there's not a phone, but I have a QR code at the end of this book, and that QR code will bring you to this musical improvisation that Pauline Oliveros did for me for this project, and she called it Aging Music. And the last page of the book is also the score that she wrote, an environmental score, and it describes the setting for the improvisation.
That's so cool.
Amazing. Adam, my version of this question for you is, so I noticed the Lamanites in your poem, and I was like, whoa, there's Lamanites in here. How much does like Mormon mythos kind of impact the book and kind of shape it?
A little bit. I think I'm glad you picked up on that because you know, I think we were in the one place on earth where people would be like, oh yeah, Lamanites, we got that. I think that I'm a non-Mormon, and I think growing up in Utah as a non-Mormon, it offered a very interesting experience. I mean, I was growing up in Utah back in the, you know, mid to late 80s, early 90s, throughout pretty much the whole 90s. And Utah was not nearly the kind of diverse melting pot that you may look at it as being now. And even now, that's kind of a laughable statement, I know. But the idea of Mormon theology from a non-Mormon standpoint was so fascinating in so many ways. You know, I mean, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but when you go to public school in Utah and you hit, you know, middle school and high school, they have seminary classes where, you know, if you're a student of the Mormon faith, you can take, you know, courses, you know, across the street for college credit, basically for high school credit. And you know, it was kind of an interesting experience to not be part of that. But I think that there's such a mythology that's wrapped up. I mean, there's so many overlapping mythologies in Utah. If you think about, you know, the native inhabitants mythologies, you think about the Mormon mythologies going into it. You think about the current ones we're creating about the West and what that looked like. You know, I think of, you know, Clive and Bundy would be a recent example of how that mythology has spread out and you know, kind of reached its tendrils into other things. Or, you know, you look at Mitt Romney as another kind of example of that. You know, Colorado City and you know, just all these kinds of wonderful and strange and beautiful stories. It was hard not to have that kind of influence, you know, my headspace in that way. Yeah.
Okay, there's a question in the chat. This seems like a follow-up to a question I asked Shira a little while ago. But this question, do you refer to it as concrete poetry? So do you refer to what you're doing as concrete poetry, Shira?
Some of my poetry is concrete poetry. Others is, I wouldn't necessarily call it concrete poetry. So concrete poetry is, for me, when the thing that I'm trying to conjure is also literally, you know, for instance, a visual poem that I did titled Scale uses the letters of the word scale to enact a sense of scale. You can find this poem at the Poetry Foundation site if you want to look at it. I have a poem called Pine Cone that's in the shape of a pine cone. So I would call that concrete poetry. So for instance, you know, if I have like a poem that is called Rose and it's in the shape of a rose, I will call that concrete poetry. But I'm trying to find, I mean, I have there's a lot of visual stuff in here, and I'm trying to find one in particular that is centered on hair. And let's see if I can find that, and I can like, okay, so can you see something like that? Mm-hmm. Right, so that is, okay, so, you know, the squiggly lines are like hair, so that part of it is concrete, but you know, I mean, that this isn't really concrete poetry. So I wouldn't. So no, it's different kinds of visual things. So I could yeah, it's different kinds of visual things. And among the visual poems are concrete poems.
Shira, Adam, do you two have any questions for each other?
There we go. Actually, I am curious. I mean, you know, I've just been thinking about the myth of Sisyphus. I mean, was that the entry point for your book in that sense? I know that you know, you mentioned existentialism. Of course, that got me thinking about Camus' essay, right, The Myth of Sisyphus, where, you know, you have to engage with the task at hand in order to find enlightenment. Well, some version of enlightenment, I guess. Was that a jumping off point to you? Do you look at the French, I guess, absurdists on some levels being instrumental in the composition of this book? Or
no, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that. I was already focused on working on something that was centered on female aging, and I had already written some things, you know, in this work, and in fact, I was blocked. And a fiction writer friend of mine, Matt Kirkpatrick, gave me some constraints. And that's how I wrote the first Sisyphusina poem, how I came up with Sisyphusina. Then I have no idea. And I read Camus, you know, when I was much younger. And I've had a lot of Sisyphus-like experiences, and it just, you know, I just could relate to Sisyphus. What can I say?
We all have our boulders, right? That's it,
But well, the thing also is that there is something about, I don't know about now, but like when I was an adolescent, there weren't really that many women that I could like be learning philosophy from,
Yeah.
and so that was a problem, that was a tension that I felt, and so so I just try to I try to fill in those gaps.
Interesting. Thank you. That's interesting.
Shira, did you happen to have a question for Adam or not?
Well, I found it interesting, like in your haunting book, about how it also moved into landscape, and how it seemed like pollution was also something that you like focused on in your imagery. Were you like intending to do that?
Yeah, I think the book is an environmental one too. I mean, obviously the specter of global warming and climate change looms large over all of us. I mean, that's a haunting proposition in that sense.
Yeah.
That kind of, I mean, I'm lucky to live in San Diego, but it's a gorgeous place, but you're still aware of I think the impact that's happening around you, and the literal rising tide that's happening there. So I think for me, with the question of these abandoned corporations, these abandoned places, you often find the detritus of society and the I guess the perceived good that it brought. So I think pollution is an inherent part of that. Pollution is kind of like the major ghost that we're facing many ghosts right now, to be honest with you, but that's a very present one, to be sure. At least I like that idea you had about invisibility, right? There's that sense of it's present. I mean, it's 95 degrees in my room right now. That's why I'm bright pink. So there's that sense of an invisible hand that's upon us, I guess, in that way.
Well, I found those were among the things that I found really powerful in what you read, and haunting, because there's a mixture of beauty together with the toxicity in your imagery.
I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to say.